Welcome back. You asked, you shall receive. This is part 3 with Bob McTavish, mainly just because I wanted to spend more time with him. This episode also stands alone from parts 1 and 2. You do not need those as a primer, but you'll enjoy them if you haven't already listened. So go back and do that. This episode was also recorded about a month after parts 1 and 2. And after those chats, I think Bob had kind of some clarity about how the biggest design epiphanies and turning points in his life were directly influenced by the relationships with people and the impact that those people had made on him. So that is the tale that we will try to weave together today. It's from Tom Morey to Bill Bahne to George Greenough, of course, Claw Warbrick, Dick Brewer, Bunker Spreckles, just to name a few off the top of my head. So look forward to that. But real quickly first, we owe a thanks to our industry partners who make Surf Splendor possible. So consider that supporting them supports our work here. They are the Surfrider Foundation, Real Water Sports, and VAER Watches. All right, without further ado, my name is David Scales, and here is my third installment of Surf Splendor with shaping icon Bob McTavish. I hope you enjoy.
Surf Splendor.
Excellent.
Okay, so I'm actually in my shaping room now, David. It's my new shaping room, so I haven't fully got it decorated properly yet.
Why'd you develop a new room?
We've shrunk our factory. It was huge and over inefficient, and we've designed and built a brand new surfboard making facility, which is got much better temperature control, noise control. It's more compact, but it's more up to date. We've been in this building 30 years, and it was always a big space, too much room. We had a sand floor in the laminating room for ages. That's gone now. We're back to normal floors. Yeah, and we've got air conditioning, which is nice.
Oh, nice.
We have solar power on the roof, so we get all the power we want.
Beautiful. Well, it's nice having a couple of hours under our belt and episodes that we could already listen to figure out how to fill the gaps here. Where would you like to start? I know we do want to discuss surfboard fins, but maybe center it around the people and the locations where those kind of developments and evolutions took place. Where do you think we should start?
I love that. Well, it's an easy start. Last year, I wrote a story for Surfers Journal, and I never sent it because Rasta on Stab High threw a beautiful spanner in the works when he used that future thing with a twist in it was given to him, and the board that he really didn't like, he'd rejected. Once he got that new set of fins, the board came alive. And so it kind of rendered my entire article a little bit lacking. So I froze the story, but I have been focusing heavily on things throughout history, and I thought I had the full package, but then I realised I didn't.
Yeah.
So, like, fins for me started when I started in Sydney in 1962, and I had my gooseboard, foley board with me, which had a fin made out of, most fins in Australia were made out of wood, and they were a Queensland maple, which is a lovely dry timber, a furniture-grade timber, and it came in half-inch slabs, and so you run them through the bandsaw or cut a template, and then run around the perimeter to get rid of the corners, and they were pretty basic. That was the Australian fins from 62, and they were pretty basic. But I kind of twigged that we're dealing with airfoils, and that's what we should have been thinking. So I immediately made one that was 1.5 inches thick and gave it a full airfoil. Took it out at long reef on a fairly solid day, and that fin certainly surfed as well as the badly foiled stuff that was standard. So straight away my brain's going, okay, foiling is the game. And so that was in 62. But it wasn't really until a little later that things really cooked. When Bob Cooper came out here in like 58 and through to about 60 and worked for Barry Bennett in Sydney. Then he went back to Cali and he returned in 64 and he had I was at Kira and see Cooper's, the board he just bought in from the States that Yater had shaped him. And it had a plastic fin on it, kind of a dork shape. And what's this, Cooper? He said, "No, Tom Morey just made this one for me." And Tom had foiled a solid block of polycarbonate he'd cut out on a bandsaw and then jumped on the grinder, shaped this first plastic fin. Well, that led to Carl Pope and Tom Morey going on to make the first fin box in California, which he called the wave set fin. There was an anagram for water-activated vehicular engineering. Typical Tom Morey, you know. He had to have some sort of scientific attachment to it. That was really cool. So, yeah, when Carl Pope and Tom made the first fin box that you drop in and run the screw down, that revolutionised production in California because you no longer had to, in the glassy room, you didn't have to stick fins on, you know, and then laminate around and into the sanding room, sanding around the fin, polish, you know, gloss it, all the runs on the vertical on the fin, paint, and then polishing it. So by putting a fin box in, hallelujah, you know, Tom and Carl Pope did such a great thing for the surfing manufacturing industry in the mid-60s. And then straight on the heels of that was Bill Bahne developed the standard slot box that we still use today. So Bill developed that thing literally 60 years ago. And Bill's a great guy and he's very generous and kind. And in proof of that, you know, Bill Bahne was when the urethane wheels, Cadillac wheels hit in the early 70s, mid-70s, Bill jumped into skateboards, which he'd been making with fiberglass decks, like a fin panel, and then he whacked Cadillac wheels on, and the Bahne brand exploded. You know, they did a couple of million skateboards through their time, Bill Bahne and Bob Bahne. And meantime, here in Australia in the 70s, my partner in business at the time was Warren Cornish. He said, "Bob, why don't I get into this? I'll get these Cadillac wheels and I'll give you $1 a board with Bob McTavish on them." And I was in the early 70s, mid-70s, and I was in that, I was shrinking back from publicity a lot. And he said, "No, I don't want to do that." So he said, "All right, I'll call them Bahne boards." So he started producing Bahne skateboards in Australia, just a straight copy of Bill's logos and everything. And he through the 70s into the late 70s, early 80s, he must have made, I don't know, many, not tens of thousands. He was at least up 100,000 Bahne boards and never talked to Bill about it. He never went to America and said, "Bill, I'm using your name. Here's a royalty." So it was in the factory when Donald Takayama visited Australia about 15 years ago. He came with Bill Bahne, and I recognised Bill. I'd met him before, I'd seen him at trade shows and stuff. He walked into the factory, and I went, "Hey, Warren, Bill Bahne just walked in the factory." Warren Cornish, he scalped it and hit up upstairs in the shaping rooms. And I said, "Hey, Bill, meet the guy that ripped you off for 100,000 boards." And Bill just laughed his hair off. "Come on, Warren." And Warren came down and shook his hand, was all very sheepish. And Bill just went, "No issue. Good on you. You know, it's all fun. We're in the fun industry. I'm not going to get nasty." And Warren,
that is simpler times. I love that.
Simple times. You bet. So as a result, I mean, I love Bill. He's hung out with him in San Diego at a trade show a couple of times. Denny Arberg and Bill Bahne. Great guy. Okay, so the Bill's fin box is, hang on, I marked the fin yesterday. It's a Bahne design box, but it's reproduced by FCS, and
Sure.
everybody's had a copy of it since 1969. So, yeah, but amazing that it liberated, by having things that you could plug in, it liberated the glassing and manufacturing of surfboards. But because, once again, because we're fanatics for polyester, we do a lot of glass-on fins in our factory. And just about most of our twin fins are glass-on. And I do a lot of guiders and single fins and a lot of glass-on fins. And incidentally, I think McDonnell Douglas and Boeing spent a fortune in wind tunnels, the fairings off their fuselage onto their fins, and all the commercial jets, jet lines, etc., they've all got fairings onto their fins. Maybe less so on military planes, which have got huge amount of power, and they don't worry too much about efficiency. But on all commercial aircraft, they've got fairings. So I think the glass-on fin with rovings is probably more efficient, but we haven't got wind tunnels to play with.
Yeah.
But the spin-off from that is wind tunnels, surfboards. Well, we're dealing with fluids the whole time. The air's a fluid, water's a fluid. Just that water is 800 times more dense. So you can do what works for air comes pretty close working in water. Sure. So that's when the windsurfing era was so phenomenal, because you're standing there holding a power pack at 5 meters of sail, 5 square meters, and you're fanging around the ocean, and there's one thing countering the water, countering this giant sail in the air, 800 times the volume of the area of the fin. They were both working in different fluids, but they were playing against each other, the small, powerful one in the water and the big air-driven one above you. So there was a fabulous era of fins, and we were going so fast across the water that things like cavitation and ventilation came into the game. Like you get out through the break and you open it up and you're fanging out across the ocean with a choppy onshore wind, and you're chattering, and then suddenly the tail would let go and the fin would just it loses laminar flow and just go sideways, and you just go, lost all your speed. So you start again, you pump it, get it going again. And we had to learn how to counteract that cavitation. There's a little brand in Australia called Multi-Fins, and he was doing pretty much what Fins Unlimited was doing in Cali, producing fiberglass fins, multicolours and layers, etc., to go in the Bahne box, producing plastic moulded injected fins, the way Carl Pope and Tom Morey did. Because after Tom hand foiled that first one I saw at Kira, he realised, of course, injection is the way to go. So they started do his hatchet fin injected. They did a nice Yater fin. They did 2 of Greenough's. They did a bigger one, and then the Greenough's Stage 4. They were all injected plastic. And so my friend John Thomas started just around the corner here in Byron Bay, Multi-Fins proprietary. And so we had a good manufacturer here in our little town selling to the world. So I designed a fin. I was on the hydrofoil ferry in Sydney. It used to run from Manly across the harbour to the city, and it had hydrofoils, just very similar to us going on to 8040. And they had watching hanging across the harbour and hanging over its side. They had little, they call fences, which is a little plate that wrapped around the foil to stop air tracking down onto the low pressure side of the fin and ruining the laminar flow. And they had 2 of these fences wrapped around each arm as it penetrated the water. And the only reason they stopped running those boats was because the propeller shaft was so long, because the boats were off the water flying across the harbour. The shafts, these long stainless steel shafts, were so long that hit something in the water, and they'd bend the shaft and the boat would stop. and they had to pull it out of the service and replace the shaft, and they were doing that far too often. So they went back to conventional ferries in Sydney now. But those foil ferries were amazing at the time. Anyway, so I made this fin for John Thomas, moulded it in the windsurfing era, and it immediately stopped the cavitation, the air running down the back of the fin. So John Thomas took it to the world. He gave all the trade shows in Europe, and windsurfing was massive there. And I did collect a royalty that time. I think it might have been 30 cents or something. But he sold, maybe 600,000, 700,000, 800,000 at all the trade shows. Wow. The windsurfing world was so massive in Europe at that time. It was the best thing for a couple of years till a lot of other copies came out, versions of it. But it was fascinating. And then in Hawaii, they found another solution for the problem. Like, very much like the Bonza. No, not the Bonza, sorry, the Twinser. A small leading fin in front of the main fin. Well, Jobson put the pop dozer about 82, 83 after the thruster hit. Well, was it Jobson? What's his name? Yeah, Will.
Yeah,
Will
Jobson.
Will
Jobson. Yeah.
Okay, so he had those little lead fins. Well, the windsurfers in Hawaii found that the Maori guys, incredible, great. The pinnacle of windsurfing is Hawaii on Maori. And they found that like a regular fin in the Bahne box, and then locate a little fin yay maybe about 2 inches high, with mounted in front of it. And that remedied the ventilation and cavitation problems more efficiently than my fence fin. So that became the standard. But it's an intriguing thing because today with quads and twinsers, that same principle is applying of a lead fin and a trailing fin, and more efficient. I don't want to get bogged down on the technicals of it, but yeah, it's just funny how windsurfing solved a lot of fin design issues that are still current in surfboards today, and people don't recognise that.
It does make sense, though, because the first realization I had with something similar was Dave Parmenter, who had gotten into open ocean, like single man kind of outrigger canoe type thing, where he said, you're covering so much ground and you're surveying so much more space and you're tracking swells that are coming at you from 100 yards away, that by the time you get back on your little surfboard and you're playing in the quote shore break, it's so much easier to understand and identify after you've processed the bigger variables covering more ground.
So good, which is like downwind foiling today. Right?
Yeah.
I know you've been foiling, but you got into downwind yet, where you're chasing those swells that pop and re-emerge and die and re-emerge?
No, I'm familiar with it, but I've never done it.
Okay. We, in windsurfing, we're doing the same. And there's one day, it was interesting, Joey Cabell came to Australia he was invited as a guest for a longboard event out here at Byron. And Joey came to dinner that night and with me and my wife and kids and him and his girlfriend. But that day that he came, I'd actually windsurfed Lennox Point. I'd been dreaming of it for 5 or 6 years and figuring out how to do it. I got barreled on a 16-foot mast. Yes.
What?
Yes. And I've seen Wayne Lynch do it too, getting barreled on a windsurf. For Robbie Nash, probably done it a dozen times.
Yeah.
But what happened was you couldn't get out off Lennox because it's a big wind hole, a dead hole. So you had to go down the coast to Flat Rock, which is about 4 or 5 kilometres down the coast. It's got clear wind, giant, and me and my buddy jumped in, sailed right out, and then we ran downwind, right like we were trying to describe there, where Dave Parmenter described and what downwind foiling is like today, where you're fanging down the ocean with what's called an open reach, where it's the fastest point of sailing, and super comfortable sailing. You got a harness on, you're just hooking to it and relax. So we got out of flat rock and it was huge. So just jump over waves and get out. Then running down towards Lennox, coming down the back of Lennox, just banging down and running across these open ocean swells. They were solid. And then got to Lennox and I plopped into the water, and my friend John too. We laid on the thing called the Pinnacle, which is a little rock bombing off Lennox. It only breaks when it's like, I don't know, 10, 12 feet. It starts to break. And we laid in the water and said, right, we're here now. Now we're going to catch one of these things. And so you do a deep water start, get enough wind over the sail, and you pump it and pump it. It pulls you out of the water. And then you're looking only when there's waiting for the right wave of a big set. And it was really on this Pinnacle, it sucked and stood. So you could take off on the wave out there. Then it would back off and you'd run left towards the headland and pinching upwind. And then you'd turn when it was the right moment, turn, come around the corner, pump it a few times, get more speed, and come racing down into Lennox through the back door of the bowl. And you see the thing fringing and fringing. And having surfed it for 25 years, you knew the place so well. And the wind was just this perfect south-southeast angle, pumping, flying down the line. And finally it stands up, it's fringing, and it threw on the bowl. And it was big enough that I was on the face. My boom, the thing threw right over. And not the tip of the mast didn't get caught because it was a big wave. But my boom got caught on the face of the wave and I pulled it back out and kept going. And then all of a sudden I just imploded through the floor, as you do when, like a giant wave, the cavity created by the lip just created a hole in the ocean and my board just fell into. So I broke my mast,
oh my
$150 or $200, ripped my sail, $250, bent the boom, ended up in dead water, climbing up on the rocks at Lennox with all this equipment with a big swell smashing and roaring down along Lennox rocks. Had to go home to my wife and say, darling, I just surfed Lennox Point and I actually got in a bowl, but it cost us, $700 and money was tight in the 80s. Then Joey arrived for dinner. And he said, "Your day, Bob?" I said, "Man, I just got barreled at Lennox Point," and he was so seething with frustration that he wasn't there because he was at the event up in Byron town, Longwood.
Yeah.
But people, find that hard to believe. So I find it hard to believe until I saw Wayne Lynch do the same thing down in Victoria.
Oh, really?
Get barreled at a place. Yeah, off lawn. There's that big right-hander breaks way outside lawn on a good day. And Wayne and I were the only two surfing it. And I got cleaned up and I was in the suit getting dragged by all my equipment. And Wayne pulls this bomb right in front of me. He just screaming down the wall, the thing pitched. He's in the barrel with a 16-foot mast and another 1.5 foot of equipment underneath. Made the thing fine and kicked out. Now I see, told him, is he okay? I mean, it's a big day, Australia gets big.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Those boards can travel obviously a lot faster, but I would also think that the air inside the tube would create a lot of turbulence.
Yeah, I guess I never thought about that. And that's probably in my case, I got too deep and the thing just fell through the floor. I had that surfing at Lennox a lot, and I'm sure heaps of surfers on big waves know about the trough when you're deep and the lip just carving and creating a trough to fall into.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I didn't even intend to tell you that story, but it just started on fins. But
yeah, so if we're going to follow the fin kind of chronology, do twin fins come into the picture next?
Oh, that's so interesting. That's such a good question. Because I told you I saw Miranda and Brothers in San Diego, their first swallowtail, but there was still a single fin. But Steve Liss, and I'm a bit sketchy on this area, somewhere there, Steve Liss on his knees did the swallowtail, like he sketched, he knelt on the blank and sketched around himself to get the shape. And that's beautiful, great concept. And then he added twin fins to it. But I was at Noosa in 1970, shaping with Kevin Platt, when the first twin fin hit Australia. There was a guy called Tom Hoyer. And I don't even know his origins. Tom migrated to Australia. He lived in Western Australia. He made surfboards there through the 70s, 80s, 90s. And Tom bought the first twin fin at Noosa. So I grabbed the thing and surfed it on the beach break. Cut my foot on the fin in the first 20 seconds. And I went, forget that. And I paddled back in and toweled it. But couldn't get it out of my head. So made another one and surfed it at Noosa, but I made a glider. I made an 8-foot glider and I put twin fins on it. And the only thing that was good about it was fast. It was faster than single fins. And so, meantime, Jeff McCoy in Australia got into the twin fin thing and just killed it with Mark Warren and Gapper and so many good surfers, Cole Smith. And so the early 70s was dominated by twin fins made by Jeff McCoy, and the Narrabeen guys were just incredible. And they explored the twin fin. Then Mark Richards got onto it when he was at his peak, and Reno Abalera fed him a lot of info. But Mark pulled the tails right in. Mark only had a 15.5-inch, 1 foot up tail. You check all Mark's twin fin designs now, they're narrow tail. And hallelujah, I copied that too, and I started producing twin fins. And the reason is that the fins were pulled in tight, so your toes and heel were directly over the twin fins, so you could manage them. Whereas the Tom Hoy design, the McCoy designs, you had to move your foot from left to right. Yeah, bottom turn, move your toes over the fin. Cut back, move your foot, cut back. So the Mark Richards narrow 15.5-inch tails and stuff I was doing here in Byron, you didn't have to move your foot. And those old boards were phenomenal, and they still are. And so the twin fins I make now, I've got a 15.5-inch tail with a flyer, it's tail. And the fins are fairly tight so that you get your foot in to drive them from rail to rail, and they are fast. I think everyone agrees now that like a twin fin forehand is the fastest package, and that's where I think it's been established that Bryce Young and Brian Birch that a twin fin on the forehand is the best accelerating driver. Not a good backhand, and the reason is that you've got hips, knees, ankles, toes, forehand, which can easily manage a brutal power pack, which is a twin fin. So it's so much lift and drive. Whereas under your heels, you've only got one impact point. That's your heel driving through. So their solution is to put a quad on the back end and a twin forehand. That's the asymmetric setup. And it's revolutionary. It's just wonderful. And we make a lot of asymmetric boards here. Quad back end, twin fin forehand, fastest package, most comfortable package going. But they've got to be located right. Even quads, when they came out, most quads are pretty hard to put on rail because you've added extra square inches to your fins out under your toes and out under your heels. So therefore it was harder to bank and roll. But I worked with Kelly on that about, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 years ago. And we had some long phone calls. And I was moving my back fins on the quads closer to the stringer to make them easier to roll on. And that was brilliant. That just worked so well. And if you look at any shot of any air of Kelly in the last 15 years, you'll see that its back fins pulled in tighter to the string in his quads. Yeah. And that bank easily.
I hate to interrupt you, but you said the forehand twin is the fastest package and that the twin was so much faster than the single. What do you attribute the speed to? Is it the number of fins or is it the width of the tail?
I think it's eliminating the centre fin. Even a good thruster is not quite as fast as a good twin fin or a good asymmetric. And it's because I believe, and I strongly believe, that it's diagonal water flow. Single fins operate in diagonal water flow, not water flow straight down the stringer. And that's why there's toe-in on the outer fins, is because they're operating in diagonal flowing water. So I don't want to get bogged down on that, but multiple fin boards, once you eliminate the centre fin, you're faster. Even, beautiful, I don't want to shoot down, beautiful classic single fins, because we'll make lots of them, not love them. But
no, I understand though. I guess my one way of thought was it's just a matter of how much mass is creating drag. And so if two fins are less mass than one big single fin, that would be faster, and that would be, or, it'd be less drag, which would mean faster. But I hadn't considered how much the placement actually does matter.
Yeah, that's when that thing happened with Rasta, and Futures gave him a thing with a twist. Suddenly I realised that the boundary layer, which is the water closest to the hull, is operating under different flow angles than deeper water, because every hull passing over and through water is pushing water sideways, just as a displacement function, creating an extreme diagonal flow closer to the hull on the boundary layer. But as you get a little slightly deeper water, then you've got accurate clean water flowing up all those flows, and then the angle is more predictable and changes. So I think that the single fin in the centre is interfered with a lot by this diagonal boundary layer that's always alternating, but it's not striking the fin very efficiently. And you get the point of drag, but drag and lift is a constant problem with anything passing through a fluid.
Sure.
But I'm sure the fin manufacturers have got really good at producing good fins that lift really well using good aerodynamic principles. Sorry, I bogged down a bit.
No, it's good. One other question is the difference between glass-ons versus fin boxes. You were talking about the benefit of the fairing.
Yeah.
Why couldn't the fin companies design an interchangeable fin that had a fairing?
Tail rocker. The tail rocker in boards is the most important element that's hardly understood. I don't want to bog in on that really. But there is those, when we mount a Bahne style box in the board and you put it into the glassing room, it's sticking up at both ends, and then you grind it down flush. So there's actually a curve where the fins are mounted, and therefore the fairing. There's a guy in Sydney, Bob McTavish, an old friend of mine, he designed a fin like that with the fairing built on. But what killed him was the tail rocker.
Gotcha.
He designed it flat and flush. Yeah.
Gotcha. So the boxes themselves are uniform, but every board that they go in has a different tail rocker, and that box gets grinded down. But the fin would not necessarily match the box at that point.
No. So,
okay. Yeah, gotcha.
The glass on is the quickest way to eliminate. To get the fairing back is glass on.
Gotcha.
Very
that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
When George Greenough hit Australia, and I've told this story a lot, but it's worth it. We were living at Alexandra Heads, close to Noosa. Had to take back roads to get to Noosa. There was no coastal road because there was a bridge missing on the Morey River. But whenever the conditions were good and we rush board makers at Hayden Kenny's factory, which is right across the beach, right, literally a patch of grass. There's a little road, two-way street, and Hayden rented 2 old shop fronts. That was the factory, and Cooper was glassing in one, and I was shaping at the back of that. And then Algie Grudd was sanding in the backyard, and literally no sanding room, just some stands in the grass. And the gloss room and Hayden's little office were in the next shop, and Russell Hughes was the gloss coder, very good surfer. Russell came third in the world contest in Puerto Rico. And so that little crew, I was gluing up and shaping, Cooper glassing, sticking fins on. Grudd was algae Grudd sanding, and Russell was the gloss coder. We didn't polish in those days. We just send the boards out gloss coated. And George had moved, had come out to visit Cooper. He was staying out with us. Well, Algie Grudd, the sander, came roaring into my shaping room and said, Bob, come and see this. So I dropped tools, covered in dust, walked across the street, and there's George surfing on the first velo on his balsa board. And it was incredible just to see him we were getting ready to go to Noosa that afternoon. Obviously, everyone finished their work. But George is out in what those days I was calling a 6 foot, so it's probably a good solid 4 foot, way over it, well overhead, and taking off and running and then arcing around, hitting the base, driving off the bottom up onto the shoulder, doing roundhouse cutbacks and just carving all over the wave. And they go, what? And I just went, I want to do that. And, you know, we all the crew in the shop was going, that is fantastic, George. Okay, great. And so that, you know, kind of spearheaded us into what became the short revolution later. As I mentioned last week, Dora got in the way, Cabell, and those great longboarder. Okay, so then George, we're sharing this whole house, and George is feeding us tuna every night. So we just had a big chuck of barbecue, and we had the big slices of tuna just flopped in on the grill. So watching him catch tuna was a big turn on for foiling. Yes, he had a small rod, very lightweight rod, and he'd just hook up little strips of mullet, the local fish, a couple of inches long, inch wide, no lead, just thread a piece of mullet on, kick out on his Hodgman air mat out to the school of tuna, which were always gliding up and down the coast, up the coast in the winter of the 60s. There was so much fish around. Now they don't get there. They're always caught down in South Australia and southern New South Wales before they get to Queensland. So George would kick out to a school, and then a gentle cast, because there's no lead, just a little piece of mullet strip, drop it into a school, a frothing school of tuna, and straight away, back, he'd get a hook up, and he let it run, because the tuna like to go, what have I got in my mouth? I'll think about this. No, it feels good. Turn them around and I'll swallow it. And that's when he'd go, bang, he'd jag it. So then he let the reel run. Just about the whole reel would run as that tuna ran. George would kick to the beach on his air mat, just slowly kick in, letting the tuna run, get to the sand, leave his air mat, pull his flippers off, and start reeling it in. And he'd spend 20 minutes getting this fish onto the shore. So I'm watching him do this, and then he gets the fish onto the sand, hauling it out, but it's still fresh and kicking. And he goes, bah, look at this. And he holds the fish, still gasping. And he said, feel that tuna, feel the tail. And the tail is springy. It's like ding, 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 like a fiberglass fin. And when it's fresh and alive, the juices are so strong in that fin, not like in the fish shop where you go and check a fish out and the tail's floppy and dead, but a live tuna, the fluids in that fin are pumped up and it's like a piece of steel. And George said, well, that's why these things can get from 0 to 50 Ks in 2 seconds. You know, they're just two muscles with a couple of fins in the back. And bang, 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 and they're reaching maximum speed. And then he showed me how the tuna was tapered. It'd be looking straight down the fish, and the tail, the the tail fin is fatter at the base and it tapers up slowly. And near the tip, it does a sudden dip. And he called that's concave taper. That makes the tip real sensitive. And so from 64 onwards, I've always been aware of concave taper and how it sensitizes the tip, and which works for fishing rods. It works in a lot of trees where there are a big centre column at the tips. They often go thin and fine, which allows them to, in a cyclone, they can whip and bend and deflect. It's called tip washout, and it's used in sailboats and foil boats, and its applications are everywhere. But George pointed out in 64 how the foil to make it so efficient it affects your tip. And so good fin makers utilise that a lot. Yes, what how do I start this story? Oh yeah, George had rovings glassing his fin on, and he said, man, and when fin boxes came out a few years later, he's going, oh man, where's the rovings? You know, where's the fairing? So he tended to fair most of his stuff. I think in the end he gave in a bit in the 70s when he was windsurfing. I think he did a lot of plug-in fins then. And I think his edge boards, quite a lot of them, he put fin boxes in. But he used to love foil fairings before that.
So what was the material at that time that you were making the fins out of?
Thank you. As I said before, maple fins class was from 60 to 63. And 64, George's fin was made out of a panel of 8-ounce cloth with polyester. But he made the panel really dry. As I mentioned, I think before, that he liked a 70-30 ratio, 70% glass and 30% resin. So straight away we made, Algie the sander and I, we immediately laid up a panel and we cut fins out. We started copying what George had done, and that became the standard in 1964 on Hayden surfboards. And they were being purchased by really great competitors and winning events everywhere up and down the east coast of Australia. The Greenough foil fin, really at 65, it sort of just took over the whole of Australia and later on the world. And I think when Nat in 66, when Nat rode a really good Greenough fin at San Diego at the World Contest, I think that would have...
Are you talking about that right there?
Magic Sam, right there. That's it. That is so good. See how narrow the nose is? Like that nose is probably barely 16.5 inches wide. Yet he knows what the thing unreal. And put a bank on that thing because they're pretty rolled bottom. Oh, I'm so glad you pulled that out. That's amazing.
For listeners,
if I could show you,
for listeners who aren't watching the YouTube,
man,
Surfer Magazine
outside
from
my door, I've got another one just like that.
Do you?
About a 60. That's so good. Wow. And
yeah, it's a killer shot.
That was the end of displacement boards. Like that was the pinnacle of displacement surfing. Right from then on, 67, when the shortboard revolution started, next year, we went to planing. Boards started to plane on the water. But that's a roll bottom, and that thing travelled through the wave, partly like a foil, like it was so thin on the rails and with roll bottom. Those things were so efficient and the best displacement boards, which I love making today. When I'm shaped, this blank that I'm talking to you on, this is the blank. I'm sitting in my shaping room, right? I'm making a board just like that for the glasser. One of our glassers is a junkie for 65, 66 boards. And this blank I'm talking to you on is going to be that.
So did you... I might have misspoke last week. I thought you shaped this board, but I read something else that said Nat shaped it.
Nat shaped it. He came to Noosa, hung out for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, great waves, went back to Sydney and shaped that, and then straight to Cali, won the world contest on it.
So he shaped it, but it was with your design kind of insights.
Yeah. Yeah, and Yeah, he hadn't ridden thin rails before and hadn't ridden that template with the lot of curve in the tail and then some long parallel lines into that narrow nose, which
Yeah.
is still really unique.
Yeah.
They still work. It's an Australian style of longboarding that is sort of the antithesis of what in Californian style at the time.
Yeah.
David Newey, but thank you for showing us that.
Well, as I looked through these old magazines, I realized they didn't really give Australians much love.
We asked
I mean,
for it.
there's a cover shot in that, but you know, the vast majority of the articles and the surfer pole winners and all that kind of stuff was
Yeah,
Hawaiians and Californians.
yeah. I never bought into the nationalism, rah rah rah. We're Aussies, blah blah blah. I mean,
Yeah.
the magazines were doing that. John Whitsick did an article that stimulated a very bad reaction out of California. He called it "We're Tops Now." I don't think it's in that issue, but it was a very provoking article. And Bob Evans, the movie maker in Australia, who started Surfing World magazine, which you know
Y-
only too well,
Yeah. Yeah.
Bob, he was very nationalistic and trying to push for nationalistic agenda. I wasn't interested in it. I just still see us all as brothers. We're the brothers all over the planet and we're a surfing tribe.
Yeah. Pardon the interruption. Just a quick intermission here to remind you that today's show would not be possible without our industry partners. So please consider that supporting them supports our work here. You're going to need watches, you're going to need surf gear. So VAER makes watches built for the ocean, but styled for the office or even for a night out. They're classically styled watches like field watches, dive watches, GMTs, chronograph designs, but they're built waterproof from premium materials like surgical grade steel, so they're durable enough to endure the elements. We will save you 15% by going through vaerwatches.com/surf splendor. And then Real Water Sports is our retail partner with a real major focus on surfboard inventory and surfboard education as well. You can talk directly to them about your needs, or you could just dive into their YouTube channel that has a trove of surfboard review videos. They also do a really good series with of like pilot videos with Brett Barley traveling the world to sample the inventory from Real Water Sports. They also have a flat worldwide low shipping fee. So check it all out at realwatersports.com. And then, very importantly, the ocean needs more friends. So, surfrider.org is where you go to become a member for as little as $5 a month. This supports their work from beach cleanups to taking water samples at your local beach, all the way to fighting on Capitol Hill for legislative change. There is power in numbers, and to be frank, their membership numbers pale in comparison to the number of surfers that are in the lineup. So help grow the contingent of ocean health advocates by becoming a member at surfrider.org. All right, that's it. Back to Bob McTavish. Well, I don't know if this is a good kind of segue, but what do you refer to when you're talking about breakaway rails?
Well, thank you. That's a great question. Those rails on Nat's board were super fine, and all the boards from that era that I was shaping were very small rim rails, roughly equivalent to a shortboard rail today, but at the bottom they didn't feed onto a flat or concave high planing bottom. They fed onto a roll bottom. The size of the rails was as fine as a regular shortboard today, or even a bit finer. They were very thin roll depth down to thin rails. Now, when those boards were because Australian waves aren't as straight and glidey as say Rincon or Malibu. I mean, Malibu is just the most perfect machine type wave. Australian waves are never like that. Our wind generators, our swell generators are kind of stormy, and so our swells are a little uneven, and we don't have a well manicured coastline like Southern California from Bunker section down, where all your major swells from the north are filtered and curated, whereas in Australia our swells are raw. So even you go to lovely places like Noosa, it's got 5 headlands with sand bottom and rainforest right down to the water, which is just so beautiful and unique. And it's subtropical water, white sandy bottoms. It's incredible. But the swells are still a bit raw, which means as you're surfing and the sandbanks don't sort of line up perfectly like they do at Malibu or Rincon, the bottom contour is a little bit rugged. So as a result, even in the straightest wave you get, it'll have a little sucky section and then it'll go a bit fat and then it'll go fatter, then it'll go really sucky again and move on. So you've got to surf. The involvement school of surfing was keeping close to the curl. It means you've got to be on the tail a lot and you accelerate from the tail, might take a couple of steps to get some trimming, guiding trim, then back to the tail, cut back and hold back around the curl. Okay, as the section's forming, it starts to run, you step forward to get some more speed and get the glide going. But then be prepared for the next cutback then because of the bump dip there or fat dip. So our surfing and that cover of that magazine and leading up to Nueva's era, I mean, Nueva needed straight top waves so it could plant there for 30 seconds. Whereas in Australia, you haven't got the luxury of straight top waves. They're uneven. So you had to have fast footwork, which meant very pivoty tails and big Greenough single fin, but a very curvy tail template. And then widest point 5 inches behind halfway, and then a long tapering nose. So you get long trimming rails, so you could step forward and get all the high-speed trimming. And that was the pinnacle of Australian surfing. That was the best at it. It was quite a contrast to California stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I never thought about that contrast before.
Noosa was such a gift. And when the first time I went there was with old Parmenter I mentioned, and he piled it, instead of piling into his little run-around utility around Caloundra from the surf club, running around Moffat Heads and finding something, he rolled up to the surf club this day in 1960, just Christmas night, earlier, end of 59, 60, this time now, back in 1960. He rolled up in his ranch wagon. He had a Ford ranch wagon. He said, "Come on, Bob, somewhere different today." Okay, so I chucked my balsa board in, and to get to Noosa was a mission. And I remember from Caloundra to Noosa, it's nothing now. It's endless suburbs. And then you had to go out through Nambour, which was the main artery, North Queensland, up the coast, down some little country road, and then you get to Coolum, and then you drive along the beach strip, and there's nothing anywhere. And come over the hill at Noosa, you go, whoa, just this incredible big bay. Roll down the hill to the first beach. There were cows grazing at just a little property just to the right as you came down the hill. And you had to go up a sand hill to check the surf. But to your right, the little track went around the hill. Little cows. It was a dairy farm. And then to your left, Hastings Street, the main drag, was just covered in sand because the houses along the beach weren't complete. There was like gaps in your gappy teeth. There was a house here and a sand patch, another house. And every time the nor'easter would blow, it would throw sand down to the main street of Noosa, Hastings Street, which is now, it's like a boulevard in Beverly Hills. It's sell-up market. But then it was just a sand track. And then you come up onto the sand dune, and there was a crappy little surf club, like a tin shed, which was the Noosa Surf Club. Good story here. Core, Doug Warwick. Everyone knows it's core. So
Yeah.
This is late December 59 or early 60. Claw was living at Kingaroy, which is a peanut farming place just up the road of there. He was there at the same time I was, or the same month, and we were and Pa Bendel and I and Claw would be the first surfers to slap eyes on Noosa. Claw, he was 16. He had a board. I don't know what brand, might have been one of Hayden's. There was a trawler in the bay because a cyclone had hit, and there were very few trawlers around at this stage because prawning had just begun as an industry. But there was a trawler in the bay at anchor, and the Claw told me that the anchor had drifted in the sand base and they needed help, his guys. I don't know how, but he paddled out on a board to this trawler. I'm not too sure what the rest of the story was, but Claw told me this 30 years ago. I mean, first, I was just stunned that he and I were both in the same place at the same time. And Claw and I have been friends forever and still good friends. Second, that he actually paddled out to help this trawler that was in trouble. So probably maybe the trawler skipper couldn't swim or something. I don't know. There was like those days. And nextly, that there was nobody anywhere in Noosa town that could help a trawler except Claw on a surfboard. And so that's why.
Amazing.
And so I arrived at Noosa and Bob Bahne said, wow, well, let's surf. So we see this headland. So we drove around a little further to the first point, and the forest right down to the water. I'd never seen a point wave before. Right? I was surfing beach breaks in Caloundra, and I'm 16 years old. And we paddled out at a point break where the sun is beating off the sand and bouncing the light off the bottom. And the water's just tropical below. And then the trees are right over the break, and there's nobody. And so we surfed there, just the two of us. And the Ma came out as well there. And so we surfed first point, the three of us. After surf, he drives us up the top of the hill to where the pub is now, and there was a motel there, one motel in town. He said, come on, we'll have a steak. And I never had a steak dinner in a restaurant or a cafe in my life. So Pa shouted, there's a steak lunch. And then, now we're back to the surf. So we drove back down in the ranch wagon. Let's look at the other places. So we drove around past Johnson's, perfect place, around the corner, National Park. It's a long, long, long way. Come on, we'll try this one. So the two of us paddled at National, down the rocks and jump across. And my first wave, I went way down into Johnson's beach, way down round the corner. And as I kicked out, I realized I had to walk back over the hill, paddle all the way around. And I just went, boy, I wish I had some more of my friends here. I wish there were some people here. It was so lonely. So lonely. Unbelievable.
Wow.
1960. And then, so that was my first encounter with Noosa. And I went back many times up until I bring it. It's a long way. From Sydney to there is like 600 and 700 miles. And it's a long drive. 10, 12-hour drive. And drive through the night always with you get a gang together to go all the way from Sydney to there. It's an overnight drive. You've got a time there's a cyclone hitting, guarantee you swell. So we did that many times, and just sleeping there in the national park as while the cyclone's raging, just surfing all day, every day. One day I couldn't get back to Bill Wallace's in 64. I called Bill on the first trunk call, so we put coins in, feed the coins in, talking to Sydney. Said, Bill, where are you, Bob? I want to get some shapes done. You've been gone 10 days. I said, we can't. The roads are blocked, putting 20-cent coins in. The road's blocked. Yeah. We can't. It's flooded. Oh, okay. Where are you? Oh, Noosa. What? I said, look it up. Look at the map. Noosa. Oh, okay, see you soon. So we came back up the storm after cyclone. He went and bought a block of land there, didn't he? He went a couple of years later. He sold up Bill Wallace Surfboards, drove to Noosa, bought a beachfront block with his wife Betty, and started a little Bill Wallace surfboard shed back in Noosa. Built the house or units on the beach, sold that, moved into the new developments, and he cruised on that the rest of his life. And it was amazing. It's wild. Wow. But literally the road was, every time there was a cyclone, the road was blocked from Brisbane. And you had to,
amazing.
had to charge through these really crappy roads to get there. Now Noosa is just, I can't go there anymore. Well, I try, but just the traffic's too intense.
Yeah. No, that's
Next time,
unbelievable. It's interesting that it was developed, though. Like, there was a restaurant, there was a hotel, there was houses, and nobody even was surfing it.
yeah, there was retirement people there. A
Okay.
few Melbourne people had retired. Very few, like I know, everything was just piled around Hastings Street and the
Yeah.
first part of the hill. No surfers. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Went back many times early, and then when Hayden Kenny offered me a job at Alexandra Edge in '64, well, Noosa was our backyard. We'd just drop tools and go up there whenever it was good. In fact, when it was really good, instead of dropping tools, I had to cut through the power planer lead. Right, because as a shaping 10 a week, Cooper glassing 10 a week, Rudd sanding 10, we had to do 10 a week. I was a shaper. I got to get in early and get them done. If the surf outrageously good, and we just cyclone was raging, and Hayden wants those boards done. Twice, I laid the cable over the blank, picked up the planer, and just marched the planer straight across the power lead. Everything fizzing, factory short circuit everywhere. I go, Hayden, I've run over the lead. And he go, oh. So he'd have to get take the electrician, get it rewired. We pile into this one old Chevy we had, an old 36 Chev. We'd just pile in and off to Noosa. Only desperate times.
That's hilarious.
We did it twice.
You could only get away with it twice. Eventually, he'll figure out it only happens when there's swell.
Exactly. Hayden was pretty good boss. But yeah, we just had to do it.
I never even would have thought to ask who pioneered Noosa, because I just think it's always been surfed. Were there any other surf spots that you were the first to surf?
I did a lot of Lennox Head. That wasn't exactly the first, but I was certainly with Greenough. Okay, Greenough used to come every winter and stay with us. And so 64 of the Supply 66, 67 in Sydney, developing the shortboard. So I wrote a letter to George in early '68 and said, George, this year you're not coming to the Sunshine Coast, the fork of Brisbane. We're now at Byron Bay. We're surfing Lennox all the time. You will love it. You've never seen the place. Yeah, you're going to love Lennox because it's got so much power. And so from '68, I rented a house here in Byron because I'm making money off Morey popes from designing a chapter for them. And I had open house, everyone was logged. And so I had Gary Keys and Chris Brock, friends of mine from Sydney. And George and I, that fitted into my car. I had a Ford Zephyr, an English Ford. They stripped everything out of it, just had plywood in the back. And so two cane chairs in the front. And we'd roll down from Byron down to Lennox. George had his cameras. And George started shooting in the most limits of pure fun. And Lennox, we were the only surfers. There was a couple of locals that lived in Lennox but didn't pursue it much. One guy called Ben Kropp, who became a very famous underwater cinematographer. He lived there and he had surfed there. So a few people had surfed it over the 60s, but it wasn't until late 60s that we focused on it and got really serious about it. And we had so much epic surf there in '68. '69, I moved on to Angari, spent a year living there because it was empty and no one around. So we had a wonderful year there. And then I came back to Lennox to live for 30 years from 1972. So, I really made a dig of myself at Lennox. But as the crowds expanded slowly, I was driven away.
Yeah.
So that was one. And then I'm going to tell you about that. When I moved from Lennox to Byron, I was a bit sad because there's no big waves in Byron. But a good friend of mine, a Chippy, was the maintenance guy at a place called Ray's of Outrigger, which is a upmarket hotel. And he'd call me, well, then we had mobile phones, this is 30 years ago, and he'd call me and go, Bob, it's happening. And I'd drop tools and fang around because there's a bombie, a sand-bottom bombie off the Cape in Byron, way out. It says the easternmost point of Australia, and there's a pot of sand out past there. So you're out in the where every shark has to migrate past. And we saw a lot of sharks. But through the late 90s, early 2000s, for a decade, we had this, the Warriors bombing. And I swear there was no more than half a dozen people that had the knowledge of the place to want to surf it regularly. And a big left-hander. It's a big south swells. The better east swells are the best. So summertime, big, strong, great line swells. A right-hander would peel into deep water, very deep water, 90, 100 feet deep. And if you ever got wiped out there and you get pulled down into those deep holes, you've got to climb up the leg rope to get back out, But the left was a wedge, and it was a wedge takeoff. Always around, I've got to say 10, 12 feet, because it's easily that and bigger.
Yeah.
And the wedge takeoff, big phase, big arcing turns, and then it would taper and get smaller and tighter and smaller and tighter as it got closer to Warrigo's Beach. And it'd end up being a little 2 or 3 footer while you'd taken off on a 12-foot wave. That it funneled and got tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. And I was riding quads out there for the last 25, 30 years ago. I started on serious on quads, and that was my go-to out there. And it's gone now. The bank has disappeared the last decade. And when it comes back, bang, it'll be on again. But there's only, as I said, half a dozen people that really got seriously into surfing that place because it's lonely, it's wild, but it's incredible. And it was, to me, it was just a salvation after leaving Lennox.
Yeah.
And with all its crowds to end up there. So good.
Why was the quad?
Sorry?
I was just going to say, why was the quad the preferred setup for that wave?
Speed. With like a twin fin, no center fin. And it was just faster. And these waves funneled off real fast down the line.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
You were saying one time you broke your board out there?
Oh, early morning. I pulled in the factory to grab my gun. Big east-southeast swell, perfect swell. And as I was leaving, Warren Cornish, my business partner, he was pulling his jet ski out because he's a tow surfer at the stage. I said, Warren, come around and tow surf on this bombing. Like, you go to Lennox every time, and you're riding giant Lennox, and they're down in Ballina on the bar. Come on, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. It's really early in winter, so just barely sunlight. So I drove around, paddled out, best day ever. Paddled into position, and then got sucked over the falls by a big one, backwards. Broke my board, so there's only a leg rope and a foot of the tail left. The major part of the board blew away in the wind. Came to the surface, and now what am I going to do? Because easternmost point of Australia, big ocean currents moving around. I lined up some Norfolk pines with a radar tower on the headland. I said, right, I'll start swimming. And so I was swimming, had to swim clear of the break and then start swimming to shore. Swam for 15 minutes, checked my line up. I hadn't moved. Because when the swell's that angle, the bay fills up with water and actually turns and runs out to sea through the break. Very slow out to sea. Swimming pace. I made no progress whatever. So I said, right, abandon that idea. So if I swim across the current, swim north, and then aim to come in way down the beach by Longel, I should do it. It might take an hour. So I started that swim. Then, out of the blue, Warren Cornish appears in his jet ski for the first time. So the only other people in the water is me and Billy Hesh and his tow partner and me. So he said, jump on the back, 30 seconds, I'm on the beach. So thankful. But
Wow.
yeah, it's
all because of that invite.
Yeah, because I saw him at the factory. He was an early bird. I wasn't his tow partner because when I first started working with him in 98, first day we went tow surfing and I hit the throttle too hard. He fell off. He'd used bungee cord on the post and the tow line and the tow handle came flying back across the water and smacked me across the face.
Oh.
And I got a plastic lens in there from that event, and I've still got dents in those. So I went, no, I'm not Warren's tow partner. And plus, we lived different schedules. You know, he's an early morning dude. I wasn't. And so yeah, I never became Warren's tow partner. Kind of glad because he's a crazy guy. He's dead
now. I wanted to ask you, you've referenced asymmetrical surfboards a couple of times.
Yeah.
When did you start experimenting with asymmetricals?
1962, Midget came back from California for the first time, and he had a Nelson Ekstrom asymmetric diagonal tow. So Carl Ekstrom had turned him onto it then. And for people who don't know, he's the guy who designed the Flowrider. And Carl's still a really cool cat. I haven't seen him at trade shows lately. Have you seen him, David? Is he around still?
He's around for sure. I haven't seen him in 2 years, I'd say.
Oh, good.
But I know people, I have friends who are friends with him who see him at the beach in the morning. He goes and walks and checks out the surf and stuff.
Oh, good. Yeah. So Carl was very forward thinking, and his partner, Al Nelson. And in the first Surfer magazine, there's a shot of Al Nelson surfing, and he was Carl's partner, and they started the Nelson Ekstrom surfboards back in the 60s, early 60s. So yeah, their Asym was a diagonal tail block, and Midget brought it back and he started making some asymmetric tails, and so I made a few too. But in a 9-foot glider, or 9-foot hull, displacement hull, you couldn't really notice the difference except in a tight cut. So when I was surfing Lennox in the 70s, it became painfully obvious that asymmetrics would be the way to go there because it's just a big right-hander. So I started making Asyms with a kind of a tail, what Ben Iper called when he did those cut-off tails.
Sting?
Sorry,
the Sting?
The Sting. So I made a Sting backhand and a pintail gun forehand, or soft gun forehand. And I made quite a lot of those. But I loved them at Lennox because you get barreled with a longer, curvier forehand and then a very abrupt Sting backhand, shorter cutaway, quite brutal looking. So that proved to me Asyms were great. They were single, and I would offset the thing. So it had to lean harder. I mean, you used your heel power to crush the left-hand side. But then we got into windsurfing in the late 70s, early 80s. Asyms were very popular because out of Hawaii, there's a brand called High Tech in Maui, and he made only Asyms for surfing Okipa and other big wave spots. And they proved their worth, and that's when they started using different fins, using a forehand fin and a cutback fin. And so then my son Benny got strong on them 10 years ago, and he's been making a lot of Asyms. We have a thing called the Poach. It's a little egg shape called the Poach, which it has quads backhand and infants forehand, much like Ryan Birch, and except we don't pickle fork the nose. It's too dangerous. We're big believers.
So when I talk to people who are big believers, the convictions are such that there seems to be only upside to them. And I always wonder then, why do you make any symmetrical boards if you're fully in on Asym? Oh, okay.
Well, that's one. It's popular, and it's not scary for the punters. You look at look at an asym, you got to do some thinking. You got to rationalize in your brain. Why would I do this? Why would I buy this thing? And they 10 people then say, well, what happens when you go left? And we said, oh, like it's built for left and rights. It's just it's customized for your toes versus heels. And your toes have got all the control. Heels haven't.
Well,
Yeah, it's just
are there?
logic.
I guess another way to ask the same question is: are there any downsides or deficits to an asymmetrical board?
Yeah, carrying them in the showroom, you got to carry less, and you got to carry goofies and natural. The only thing is, you got to double your inventory.
Right. So it's just
It's just
kind of it's just inventory management and market perception are the only downsides, but otherwise, in terms of performance, you're all in.
100%. Yep.
Interesting.
It's the way to go. Yep.
Can you make stock models of Asyms, or do they generally need to be asymmetric, or do they need to be custom?
No, we make, as I said, my son Ben produces a board called the Poached, which is an egg shape with asymmetric tails. But like when I made that one for Kelly last year, I went swallowtail, and I think I'd prefer to make swallows, but because I'm not surfing 6/5/8 any longer, I'll keep my hands away from that. I'm shaping bigger boards.
Gotcha. There was another thing in our notes that we wanted to cover, which was, and it might be going backwards a little bit, but Dick Brewer's Hawaii influence in the late 60s.
Very good. Because when George pointed out the flex pattern of the tuna that day in 64, I was committed to flex through the rest of the decade. But I was, when I was shaping in Dick's room for a little bit in late 67, and that's when we made that notorious board for Jerry Lopez, that he'd made a 9.6 gun, and I'd pulled the saw off the wall and placed it a foot up the tail. And Brewer was looking at me going, what? I said, nice board, Dick, but let's make it a really good board. He went, what? And he gave me a nod, and I sawed the tail off. Put a piece of foam put on the floor. Jerry was sitting there. He went, what? What? You'd expect my board. I mean, you got to realise that Jerry flew from Oahu to Maui, bringing the blank over, because you couldn't get blanks in Hawaii unless you plugged into the Dick Metz system or Surfline. And so Jerry he got a blank. And there was no blank blowers. It was a Clark blank. But he carried on the plane and spent 2 weeks there for Dick to make him his new board. And this is early pipe there, just opening up. And I sawed a foot off the tail of his new board. So he's just freaked. But Dick just rounded the corners off and made it into a square tail. That board was the most popular board in Hawaii for the next 6 months and spearheaded Dick's incredible fast progress into the miniguns. And so, it was amazing. So by the end of the year, when the Puerto Rico contest was on, Reno was riding a 6.6 wide, 16-inch wide board. Brewer just, once he got the bug for shortboards, he just powered on it. It was incredible. And he was shrinking his fins down, and he ended up with a beautiful little 7-inch fin that he was putting on most boards. And that's what we run on our Bluebird. And it's a stiff fin. It's not a flexible fin. And it's built for speed and Hawaiian power, but it's just smaller and stiffer. So it generates a sufficient lift. You're not looking for power in Hawaii. You're looking to manage power.
Yeah.
And so the Brewer fins, we still, that's right, they're looking at room one right out there. It's a Brewer template we still use.
I mean, that's what's interesting is how many of the things we've discussed that you discovered in the 60s are still relevant today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It's the principles, as I said, the early 60s, I kind of realised we're just working with fluids. So aircraft and then sailing and sailboats and sailboards and windsurfing compounded that, the knowledge of how fast moving it, you're playing across the water like a modern surfboard. And so the projections needing fins into the water were very manageable and measurable with windsurfing. You know, it just was faster from A to B. So you made a good step. Whereas in surfing, it's much harder to read that because of the curves involved and the endless combinations of angles.
Yeah.
Which makes surfing endlessly fascinating.
Do you still body or windsurf?
No, I haven't. Sold all my equipment mid-80s. Yeah. I kind of regret time. I had a big family, 5 kids. I was knuckled down working. The 80s is also when I got heavy into that moulding game, and it took a lot out of me lifetime-wise. Just simple, I was surfing what I was making, which was boards from 6 foot through the 9 foot, but mainly I was surfing. My favourites in that era were a thing called the carver, a thing that generous tail rock. It was like a short board, like on principles of merit, like grafting some more meat on the front and the tail to make it more comfortable for a 60-year-old surfer.
Yeah.
And that was a great board.
A listener sent me a note asking if you sold your name or licensed your name to Rip Curl at some point.
We did, yeah, back in 2000. I worked with Claw and Byron for a couple of years, and we were building the clothing brand. And then for the first time, they hired a new CEO from Abercrombie and Fitch, who just set up all the Honolulu stores, I think, like 400 outlets or something like that. So they hired him to become the CEO so they could go surfing more, which didn't. Well, and his first advice to Rip Curl was get rid of your subsidiary brands. So they had 5 smaller brands, and McTavish was one of them. So they just cut it, set it free. So me and my business partner here bought the name back from them. Basically what they paid for it.
Yeah.
But I think we've got a pretty good relationship still with Claw and Brian.
Good. That's good to hear. I mean, the fact that you guys have such a legacy that you do, it would be a shame to have some business dealing tarnish that, you know?
No, there's no bad business. It's all, if things go a bit haywire here and there, what the heck, you correct it and pull them to line. Not as we're making good product and stoked about making good product, everything's fine. Yeah.
Well, to even be in the positions that you guys had grown into by the year 2000, you never could have imagined when you were a teenager anyway. So it's all gravy at that point, you know?
It was all gravy. It was all 3 of those guys, like Doug was a good friend, all 3 brands, and Gordon Merchant at Billabong. I shaped with him in Sydney back in the early 60s. And Gordon, we called him Greasy, you know, it was his nickname, and he was a Maroubra kid. But look at him, he started sewing those board shorts under his house at Miami Beach. And Billabong, bang, it's old buddy. And still, if I see him, it's old buddy time, you know? And
yeah,
and Al Green, the same thing. I met Al, who started Quicksilver. I met him and Barbara were camping in Gowrie in 69 or 70. I was surfing Angers a lot. And him and his girlfriend were a wife were camping up the top of the headland, and he's just before he started Quicksilver, and he was just a surfer from Victoria that we had a great time with. And so all 3 of those guys just became majors, but it's not all gravy, believe me. There's a lot of bones to pick in there. It's hard work.
Absolutely, yeah.
To get an exit from those companies is very hard. Once you build a beast, you've got to ride the beast.
Right.
Yeah.
Not everybody's cut out for it. That's for sure.
No. Well, those three were. They did so well. Or four. Yeah.
Do you
Hard workers.
still maintain a relationship with Greenough?
Yeah, I do. I mean, George is an unusual cat in that he'll pick up where you left off. If it was 6 months or 2 years ago, the conversation just resumed. So George surfs Lennox every 2 days. He used to surf it every day. Now he's down to every second day on an air mat. But being 84 years old, he's doing really well for 84. But he's got a nice little gang of friends that he surfs with down there. But I tend to surf the Byron strip here at Belongil more than going down to Lennox, although it's always in the back of my mind that it's going to be good today. And I don't surf the point. I'll be surfing, the boat channel, which is a beach. It's a combination of reef and beach. Yeah, but it's regular. And George and I got an endless friendship.
Yeah.
Everything is always happy and positive. It's always about inventions and design and something to do with the water.
Is he still tinkering?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Endlessly. He's got a great workshop. He's farming his little property on the hill too. I think he grows more brown snakes than vegetables. So. If we don't see him down the beach, we get worried because there are so many brown snakes on the property.
Yeah, sure. Can you think of, in all your years, the best surfing that you've ever witnessed?
Live, not on video.
Yeah, live.
Video, but live. And the most stunning thing was George that morning in 1964 to see someone carving and driving vertical and roundhousing, which was the antithesis of log surfing and the antithesis of the big waves that were portrayed in the early surf movies where people just stood there and rode straight lines. So that was probably the most stunning event. But then Nat could always do things that seemed impossible. He could hit a floater or a re-entry on a big 8-foot wave and pull it off easily. One day I saw Nat, we went surfing a little place down the south coast called Bellambi Point. This is very early, 62. And he was 14-year-old kid. I was 18, 19. I was 18. And he rode a wave on the point. We're nose riding, etc. around that time. But he got covered in white water and stuck his head out the top and laughed his head out. All he could see was just his head buried in water. He got a huge grin now when his grin's his big. And he kind of fizzled out next to me and said, "That is a reverse head dip." I said, "What?" Because we were big into head dips at that stage. I like Mickey Munoz, hands behind, just stick your head in the water. And he called it a reverse head dip because he covered himself with water except for his head sticking out. I mean, dumb little thing. But it was just funny and clever.
That is very funny. Yeah.
Yeah, that's typical Nat. He could just do stuff that no one else could do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
In our last chat, you said you only bought 2 surfboards in your life, and the second one was a Brewer. But you never described that scenario and what the board was. What was
Me
it?
being the incredible businessman, right? I wanted Brewer to come out and make a buck. And at the same time, a friend, Bob Raymond, was producing a movie called Going Vertical. And it had a lot of Brewer in it and a lot of me in it, quite a few others. And Bob said, "I'll buy a ticket, get him down here, but he needs to make some money while he's here." They said, "Oh, well, maybe I'll give him, I'll cut 50 boards with our company and he can sandpaper them and finish them off and he can get paid a nice wad of money to go home with." Well, I talked to the partners about it and said, no, we're too busy with our own brand. We haven't got room for 50 brewers. So I called a friend at Noosa, Whitey, who's a good surfboard maker, and said, "Mate, you want to do 50 brewers?" He said, hell yeah. So he got in touch and took it over and did it. And we paid the ticket for Brewer to come down. The movie mate paid the ticket. And Whitey gave him 50 boards to show. Of course, when he gets here, not that keen on that much work. So he sort of was palming it off to the other shapers and just signing Brewer. But I grabbed him and said, Dick, after that board, that thing we did with Jerry, where I saw the tail off back in 67, said, I give you revenge. And I said, I want to buy a board off you. I want a 9.6. And he said, only if I can saw the tail off. I said, all right, good. So I bought a board off Whitey. I bought a 9.6 Brewer, but Brewer sawed the tail off. I've still got it in the showroom. It's got glass beautifully and everything. He sandpapered it and cleaned it up. But I've got a copy of what Jerry got that year. It's hanging in our showroom.
So what did the final length come down to off of 9.6?
8.6. 8'6". Yeah. Beautiful board.
Did you ever ride it?
I had other issues with Dick over the decades because I didn't like a lot of his rail shapes at times. I'll tell you one story. In 68, I rented a house around here at Watty Beach, and a couple of Yanks appeared. There was Greg Weaver and Don Morley. Have you heard those names?
I know Greg Weber, but not the Yank.
Okay, no, not Greg Weber. This is Weaver.
Weaver. Okay, no.
And he became an action photographer through the 70s and 80s, and he did very well. And Don Morley lived in Hawaii. There was a photo of him in one of the early surfer magazines. Anyway, they were drifting. They drifted into Byron in March or April of 68, and they had a couple of Larry Strada shaped and glassed boards from Maui, copies of what Brewer was doing. And I knew Larry as a shaper. I met him in Hawaii. And he copied a couple of Brewers, and they were 8-footers. This is in the minigun thing. So I'm with Brewer in December 67. This is April, May 68. Not even May, probably just April. So 4 months later. And his 8-foot Brewers, copied by Larry Strada. So we finished him off at San Juan Circles where I was. They didn't have fins glassed on them. We gave them fins, sanded and glossed them, waxed them. I said, well, come and stay at my place. And so they stayed for the next few months with my house at Watty. So they bought an old bomb car, and they started to join us at Lennox. Originally, it was just our 4-pack, George, Gary Keys, Chris Brock and myself. These guys started to show up as well, although they drove on to Noosa and they went travelling around, but they showed up at Lennox. So the first time they got their board sanded and glossed and finished, they showed up at Lennox. I borrowed Don Morley's board, the Brewer, and Brewer copy. Took off at Lennox fast. I think flew because it had very hard edges in the tail. But up front was a bowl. Now, I know I gave bowls a thrashing last time we talked, which is a bit unfair. And I'm sorry, all you hull riders. I do admire hulls because hulls can actually get more vertical and come off the face better than any other surfboard. So I should have modified that comment last week. But anyway, these things had full bowl, up noses, and the hard rails in the tail. So hanging down the line, when it's fast, go to the cutback. The tail just sucked into the wave and died. One more wave, Don, I'll give it back to you. So next wave, fast, into the cutback. We were doing roundhouses on our regular rails, but the hard down in the tail and up rails in the nose created asymmetric water flow across the deck, which was just like a wing, and if the wing lifted it into the wave, pulled into the wave. So I said, done. Your boards are rubbish. Sorry, I did it again. big statements called big statements. Okay, so the high rail from the nose, down rail from the tail, hopeless, especially with they were edgy, you know. And then, so edge didn't really come into our radar. We were still making roundish rails. And you asked about the breakaway rail way back then, and I didn't explain it. The breakaway rail is designed to suit dry when you want it and wet when you need it. So on a longboard, you want it dry when you walk off the tail into the trim zone. You want a dry deck that's fast. But as soon as you go to the nose and step onto the nose, you want water to come around the rail and flow across the deck to create suction for the nose right. So the breakaway rails consisted of either a Nat's case with a very small round rail, or in Yater's case, he used the small end of an egg, which worked fairly well. We still use it here and there. In Joe Quigg's case, when he had his shop in Newport, and I walked in and saw all his rails were big, fat 1967 logs, but they pinched at the edge. He had a pinch, so the water would break away at that pinch point. So he had a very efficient rail, even in 67, whereas, say, Weber's, just big rounds, most of the brands was big round rails, whereas he had a pinch point and created a breakaway rail. So here we are. Let's fast forward now back up to Lennox in 68. We knew that we wanted dry decks, so I would shape a rail that came to a pinch point like Joe Quigg's. And you could, but you needed it. Okay, another good story. Very important story. 69. Brewer, Hinson and I are standing in the park at Pipeline, March of 69. Bunker Spreckles comes walking along. His little pair of white board shorts and a blonde girl in a bikini. And he's carrying a kneeboard about 6 feet long, about 4 inches thick, with pipes glassed into the rails. And he was kneeboarding it, and the pipes were so he could do El Rollos. So he goes walking down past us guys, and Hinson was sort of California's leading shaper. I was Australia's, and Brewer, Hawaii's. And we tried to went, that would never work, because his rails were just blocked, dead flat bottom, dead vertical square rail with a right angle edge at the bottom. Vinnie Bryant shaped it on Mouth. And he said, that'll never work. He paddles out a pipe on a nice, comfortable 5-6 foot day, not big. Takes off and goes, pew, just fangs through this wave. What? Does it again. Pew. About 5 times he flew through the wave on his knees, super fast. We looked at each other and went, bye-bye. I'm on a plane to Australia. Brewer's off to Kauai, where he was living then. Bye-bye, Hinson. He's off to Cali. We all made instantly down rails with 90-degree edges. I took mine out in Sydney at a place called Curl, one of the worst waves in Australia. Freaky good day. Took off on the face. Yeah, just flew. I think so fast. I did that 3 or 4 times and I go, right, now let's get barrels. So I started hunting to get up on the face, and the thing just kept sliding off the face. You couldn't hold it up on the face at all. So I sat for a couple of hours and realised that we need some water flow underneath the rail to hold it on a steep face. So I threw that board away and immediately shaped another one with a little bit of curve to the breakaway rail. Basically, I wasn't copying Quigg. We knew about breakaway rails, and I put that rail on. It was only 6'8" by now. Their sizes are nice, and that worked unbelievably. But then, and I put that right through the tracker era, and even a couple of years ago now, 5, 6, 8 years ago, I made another tracker. We're going to introduce it into our market again. I put breakaway rails on it. People love the boards. The prototypes are out and around. But then one day I was surfing a beautiful left on the beach break out here, and the thing, I slid forward a little bit, hugging fast, drive down this left, and it just slid off the face. the breakaway rail broke away when I didn't want it to. And I went, oh no, we found the limits of the breakaway rails for the modern era. It belongs between, when we were struggling with between displacement and high planing.
Gotcha.
So it worked great on Nat's board. At that photo you showed me, it worked incredible. It worked on the stuff in between in 68, 69. But then I saw one that Jerry made, and he put a soft radius at the bottom. And I said, that's it. So I went with what I call a 20-cent rail from then on, which is the size of a 20-cent Australian coin. That's the radius. And I can put that on in when I'm shaping. I start with a bright angle. And I can put that 20-cent on both rails in 30 seconds because I've done so many. And it works. And the variations on the top of the rail come and go, but the bottom rail that I make basically, and that's what I made on Kelly's board last year, is the 20-cent coin. Yeah.
Fascinating.
That covers a lot of territory, didn't it?
Yeah, nobody connects dots too. Did Bunker successfully pull off any of the Rollos that he was trying?
Well, on his knees, I didn't see it that day, but yes, I heard of him doing it. It was a bit of a thing in 68. Yeah.
Was it?
Oh, it's at 69. Yeah.
Man, very progressive for the time, because I don't see kneeboarders doing that nowadays.
Well, yeah, the boogie guys do it all the time, of course.
Yeah. Softer landing when you're laying down and on a soft piece of foam.
You want to hear the story of the boogie board?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so I was good friends with Tom. I started working for him and Carl Pope in 68. But he was good friends with Greenough too. Now, George tells me that piece of foam was extruded by Dow Corning at 8 feet, I think, something like that. So Tom saw that's polyethylene, the first extruded foams, and amazing stuff. So Tom said, right, he sorted the block in half, and that was the length of the boogie board. And then he wedged the rails down, and then he glued some newspaper on the bottom as a smooth coat. I think it was newspaper, but he glued it to create a skin on the bottom. And then he showed George, probably at Rincon. George went, Tom, it's upside down. He said, what? Turn it up the other way. So the rails are creating a suction wall on the face of the wave. It'll act like a fin. Tom said, all right, flip it over. And it went much better. So that was the birth of the boogie board. And I got buried in trying to develop better boards out of foam and glass, but there's nothing as good as the good old polyethylene boogie board. Because flex, it brought flex into the picture. Changing rocker. You can flatten rocker and go real quick, or you can bend rocker and hook it up the face.
Right.
Which you can't do with foam and glass.
So I've seen that board that you're talking about, and I never understood why there was newsprint on it.
Create a skin. Yeah.
That is hilarious.
Good old Tom. Tom was try everything, such a good experimenter. Yeah.
Yeah, Dick Metz's Surfing Heritage and Culture Center has that board, but it's wrapped in plastic. They've got it like in a plastic kind of protecting case. So I've never actually felt the newspaper or like examined it very closely, but I've seen it visually, and it's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, he just got some glue from down the local hardware store and slathered it on and pushed the paper onto it to create some sort of a planing surface.
Right.
Apart from the rough polyethylene finish.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating.
I went through Dick's place, his shack. I had the privilege of going through there 10 or 15 years ago. It's great.
Yeah. Well, they only have, I'd say, 20% of their inventory on display.
Amazing.
80% of it is hidden or up in the rafters, but they've secured a new location, which is on the main street in Laguna Beach.
Yeah.
So it's not only a bigger location, but it's in a much more heavily foot trafficked area. So I think
Cool.
that's going to be then a whole new phase of Shack for them. It's going to be incredible.
Wonderful. There's no place like it.
No,
What
there
just
isn't.
what blew me away was the Californian redwoods from, I think, of Washington State, not California, up in Washington. There was a family up there that got heavy into surfing in the very early parts of last century. And they brought Hawaiian boards over. They brought Hawaiians over to teach them how to surf. And maybe they had a timber business, I think. And so they were making beautiful redwood boards, Hawaiian style, back in 1900, in that first decade of the 1900s. And he had about 8 of them in there. He had about 8 of these Washington-made boards. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. Well, the surfboard collection is so impressive, but they have also a huge media archive. Every magazine that's ever been printed from any surf mag, tons of videos, DVDs, plus surf photographs, slides, and negatives, and all the original imagery. So at some point, they will have all of that digitized and available for the whole world to see. But they're sitting on this huge repository, and they have interns and archivists who are doing the work to digitize it, but they just don't have the outward facing platform for you and I to like log on and check it out. It's a huge project. Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah,
It
I
really
thought
is.
the encyclopedia was a big project, but this is bigger again, isn't it?
Yeah. And Matt, I think, I don't know if he's on the board for Shack or not, but they work together all the time. So they're kind of working in concert, even if they don't have physical access to each other's stuff.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. What patience and what dedication to bring all that to access.
Well, what's crazy is I've seen a lot of this stuff, but hearing your stories of living it and witnessing it firsthand is unbelievable.
Oh, good.
So
Right.
adds a lot of color.
Like, if you got a Lennox head now, have you been to Lennox? Have you cruised into Lennox as a surf break?
I don't know. I have not been there.
Okay. Well, I mean, you look at it now, it's very trendy, upmarket place, and it's full of beautiful restaurants, etc. It's kind of like Laguna.
Yeah.
But when George and I and Gary and Gary Keys and Chris Brock were there, like it was just cows grazing on the paddock.
Yeah.
And then it was a really tiny little fishing village. The same as Noosa. I mean, lobbed there, and Claw and I lobbed there, but these were tiny little villages, and now they're swamp. The guy who owned the land, the headland at Lennox Head, who was the Lord Mayor of Ballina, George and I were talking to him about George is talking about the ranch in California versus what it's like in Australia, raising cattle. And the guy offered George and I to buy a few acres on the point in Lennox for a song. It's $2 or $3 grand. I had the money because Morey Pope was sending me these fat checks every month. And I said to George, nah, come on, we'll find something better than Lennox. There's got to be better waves somewhere. My brain just we were discovering what's good in Australia, and we still didn't. Well, 64, George and I hired a plane in Outrigger and flew through Noosa, Double Island Point, Fraser Island. And there were good waves all the way up that strip. So we didn't know where it cut off, sort of thing. It was still all mystery, thinking maybe up the Barrier Reef there could be lots of big reef breaks. And then only a year or two later, Russell Hughes discovered Bali. And and so the world was opening up for surfing. And so George and I could have bought the land on Lennox Point. George said we would buy 2 water tanks, corrugated iron water tanks, and roll them up the headland and flip them up, cut a doorway in them, and that'd be our houses. 68. I mean, it's a different world.
Absolutely. Well,
But
hindsight's 2020, of course, but
yeah,
also when you're making those checks, I think when you're young, you think that your earnings will always increase. So you're like, oh, I'm
yeah,
making this money now. Psh,
yeah,
next year I'll make more. The next decade I'll make more. And that's not always the case. And so if you have the opportunity, especially with real estate, it feels like a pretty safe decision usually.
yeah. It is. We ended up paying $8,000, my wife and I, for a block of land on top of Lennox, and we bought the first house on the cliff top over the break. And the whole thing, the house and land cost us 25 grand, 8 for the land and 17 for the build. Yeah, that was pretty nice. But
And
immediately,
what year was
someone
that?
78,
Okay.
and then immediately we're offered $100,000 for it, And then, so
Yeah.
we ended up selling it after a couple of years. And that's the thing. My wife says to me, well, if you'd had that land at the point, bought those couple of acres, you would have flipped it around and you would have lived on the profit for a while.
Yeah.
So, yeah, my wife and I built 5 houses in this district. And each
Okay.
one you make a lot of money,
Well,
more than surfboards.
so what's interesting is you referenced Hollister Ranch in California, and
Yeah,
that's the one place that has not been developed. I mean, there's homes, but they
yeah,
protected it from any commercial development
yeah.
at all. And so I saw when I was collecting photos for our last episode together, I found a photo that Greenough had taken of you surfing the ranch. And I was like, man, it looks the same.
Yeah, and Shanad tells me about it. I'm good friends with Yvonne Shanad, but long
Yeah.
distance, And
Yeah.
he told me about the shack he built up there with all recycled materials, and how lovely, how wonderful that Hollister exists still. Yeah,
It really is.
yeah,
So
wonderful. Good waves? Did you get some good waves there?
yeah, I haven't been there in years, but I've gotten it good. Yeah.
Rights and lefts,
It's all right.
coho.
It's just a
Yeah,
bunch of right point breaks. I've never surfed a left there.
yeah. Oh, that's one of the breaks George like was called right. I think that photo of me was surfing a place called Rights and Lefts. Rights and
Oh,
Lefts.
okay.
It's one of
Gotcha,
the first
gotcha.
breaks up from Gavio. Yeah.
Gotcha, yeah.
Unreal. Thank you. That board I was riding in that photo was George's baby, which was a balsa board that
Oh,
he made.
really?
Yeah, it's a 6'6" balsa board, heavy log of a thing with the worst rocker under the sun.
You're doing a good turn.
Well, you had to push that thing hard. It was so
Yeah.
heavy.
Yeah.
I surfed Rincon on it for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I've got to get back to family obligations, but I'll tell
Yeah.
you what, after we shut this down,
Yeah.
scribble down any notes for things that we didn't discuss or that we need to discuss next time, and let's get together in February.
Mate, I'll be boring by then. I think everyone's had enough of me.
Okay, we'll see. Maybe we'll push it back to March then.
Thanks, Dave. See you,
All right.
mate.
Thanks, Bob. Good to see you.
You're great. Thank you.
Bye.
Surf Splendor.